Between two sermons, so great to have you back with us. And we're continuing this 10 Commandments series, Words to Live By. Mm-hmm. And we've made it all the way to the second commandment.
Finally. Yeah,
way to go.
Right.
And this week we're talking about, Rob, don't carve for yourselves an image in any likeness that would represent God.
Right.
That's kind of the commandment that
Yes.
we're unpacking.
Yes.
Idols, some translations would say.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to delve into this. You did a great job of explaining some of the background to this, why. One of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking was a quote by, I think it was John Calvin, that theologian, who said in his typical terms, the way that he would, our hearts are idol factories.
Yeah.
I remember hearing that.
Yeah, it's a great quote.
And being like, okay, John, maybe you're a little overstating it or whatever. But I think he's making a point here with that that idols aren't just an outward thing carved in stone or wood, but our hearts produce them as well. And I think you did a great job of kind of making that distinction.
Yeah.
How does that land with you in terms of this command?
Yeah, I think, let me first say this, which maybe some people would say in listening to the series and reading the 10 Commandments, that, these two first commandments kind of overlap, and you could do them in one sermon, and I would agree with both of those comments. But to your point, what the second command, which is what we're looking at here, the don't have an image, make images of God that you might worship, God, the true God through an image. It also opens up in these verses, for I think it's 5 and 6 of Exodus 20, and talks about God being jealous and God's judging sin, but loving people to 1,000 generations. And there's this sense, even when you think of jealous, almost the first word I think of is, of course, romantic relationships, maybe even marriage. And all of that's there.
Yeah.
So back to your question about the heart, I think when you realize that what we're talking about here is a relationship with God, is worshiping God, right? Yep. No other gods before me. It's clearly worship is the general context here of these first couple of commandments, but it's not, it's not some kind of, formalistic, pay your taxes kind of worship. It's very much almost marriage is as close as you can get. I mean, it's a covenantal kind of relationship. To say that God is jealous, has a jealous love for his people, and therefore demands a kind of full heart commitment, you have to be talking about, back to your question, idols of the heart, because that's you might say the very basis of our the place in which we most have a relationship with God is on the level of the heart. So even the prohibition to have graven images might be the older version of English would say graven images. I think the NIV just says image, but is talking about concrete images like the golden calf.
Right.
But I think even if you look at Exodus 32, which we did a little bit in the sermon, it's still connected to heart issues.
Right.
Why did they do that in the first place? Well, because they had a lot of anxiety, thinking Moses is gone. It's almost like if the feeling you'd have if you're a little kid and your father goes on a business trip and you think he's never coming back.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, there's this kind of sense that that's what they're thinking. They're like, Aaron, we're very anxious. We're feeling abandoned. And that's a heart issue.
Yeah.
So I do think it doesn't take a lot of imagination, and I hope I did, and we did a good job in a sermon context to say, this is about us too.
Yeah.
This is not simply about whether you or I have some kind of physical object that we've worshipped that represents our relationship with God, but it is an issue of the heart.
I love that. I think that's important for all of us because this is one of those commands that's easy to skip by.
That's right.
This is maybe one of the easiest.
That's not my problem.
Right. It's like, that one, I got that one. Why are we even talking about it?
Right.
But I think when you're framing it in the way that you have as an issue of the heart, okay, now we're talking about something that we can all relate to.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate too where you went with the context of it. This calf, this golden calf.
Yeah.
Why were they attracted to this golden calf?
Right.
Why do that?
Yeah.
I think that's fascinating, and it's fascinating too because they're coming from Egypt.
Yeah.
You think about this people, God's people, enslaved for 400 years in Egypt.
Right.
Graven images were the only way that they knew how to worship a god.
That's right.
Or seeing people worship a god, right? So this was what they were surrounded by.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting about that is I was thinking, I may have mentioned it maybe more in my notes than in the sermon or in my mind, but all the way into the New Testament. So, much, much later, famous passage in Romans, but it's about worship, and you could probably quote it. Some of us could quote it. They exchanged the worship of the Creator for the creature, and exchanged the glory of the Creator for the creature, and began to worship. And then it says, I think in the Romans, four-footed animals. You could even say people. I don't think it says people, but celebrity culture. But there's this sense in which that's exactly what happens. Yeah. And there is an exchange of all of a sudden worshiping parts of creation. And when you go back to Egypt, to your point about the gods of Egypt, some would say this, that the plagues of Egypt, they weren't, you might say, how do you make sense of these 10 plagues? That they were connected to gods, and the gods were connected to material parts of creation. The god of the crops, the god of the sun, right? I mean, the sun's even today. I mean, not even today, but of course, also all of history, we all know that the sun is. If the sun's shut down, we'd all be dead. So the sun's a powerful thing, and so nature, or even creation, people naturally became objects of worship when there wasn't any greater divine revelation. Nobody would know who God is if God didn't reveal himself. The invisible things of God are not clearly seen. They're hinted at. You might say, gee, I look around the world, if I didn't have a faith in God, and say, there must be a creator. That seems logical, but I don't think I would look around the world and say, his name is Jesus, he died and rose on the third day, and he's a God who loves people and cares about people. That's a revelation. So it does make sense to me that both in the ancient Near East, and in our day too, people they have a natural desire to worship, an inclination to worship, but they're going to worship things that are created. Right. And that was in the unique thing that I just learned in study, which I didn't always know, because what's with the golden calf? Like why isn't it a golden bear or something? Right. But that the bull god, or in Egypt in the days of Moses and prior to Moses, maybe all the way in the days of Joseph, there was it was the chief god. The bull god was, for whatever reason, I'm sure it had something to do with the way in which it contributed, either its strength or its what it gave in its to eat and drink or whatever. The bull god was a picture of and was one of the great gods both in Egypt and even in Canaan. It was at the top of the pantheon. They had different names, but so you might say when it finally came, when Israel was anxious about wanting to know if God was still with them when Moses was gone, and that's the closest thing they had to God was Moses, they sort of stayed with the God language, but took the best of what the world had to offer in the source of gods, and that's interesting, because even though you and I don't end up at the same conclusion, a bull god, but do we take what were either our own anxieties and fears or what we value in the world, and do those influence our worship of God? I think is the real question of this passage, or one of the big questions of this passage.
Yeah, and those are the things that trip us up in the long run. And those are the things that, even as you trace Israel's history, then from that point forward became the things that those idols outward idols were really manifestations of the idols of the heart.
That's right.
The Asherah poles that that were there for the god Baal, who was the prominent god in Canaan at the
Fertility
time.
God.
Fertility god, god of the crops and the sun. You know, it's all based off of, are we going to survive? Well,
that's right.
We have to appease the gods in order to survive.
Right.
And I love what you're talking about with anxiety, how you're bringing those two together.
Yeah.
Because I think there is something there. Out of our anxiety, we often react.
Yeah.
And we think, is God really going to provide for me?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. I think one of the core issues, really not just in the second commandment, and maybe certainly in the first 4 in particular, that really deal with our relationship with God, but it's the natural inclination that all people have, past and present, to want to, I don't know, create a more tangible God, because God's a big concept. I mean, how do we wrap our minds around God? He's infinite, we're finite. Right there says there's a problem.
Right.
And that problem is, maybe a kid would do this with his parent, but I think this is even bigger with people and God. It's, I want to have my inner desires, fears satisfied, placated, and God is my, source of life, and so I like what I'm given, but I need more, and I want to craft God, maybe control God. You might say an image, whether it's concrete or even conceptual, is a way to try to control God, not because we want to be in control of God. I don't think we're that crazy all the time.
We would never say it.
Yeah,
anyway.
right.
Yeah.
But what we're looking to be in control of is our own anxieties. We're looking to manage our own fears, and we think, or it's instinctive maybe to say, I need to. If God's the source of my needs being met, if God's the source of my life, how do I shape him in such a way that helps me feel better about my anxiety? And it's sort of natural.
Yeah.
But it's not. But God's saying in this passage to do that, to do that, even if it's meant for a good reason in your own life, to meet some kind of fear in your own life, is going to diminish who I am. And if you diminish who I am for a temporary fix, in the long run, it's going to harm you in a very big way, because you're going to reduce me, God, down to something that I'm not. And then for the next 10 years of your life, or whatever it is, you're going to be worshiping a smaller God, a limited God, maybe in some cases just a false God, but certainly a limited God.
And that's what really robs us of life, is we don't get to experience God in his fullness.
All right.
We experience a version that is not accurate of who God really is.
That's right.
So I think that's a wonderful way to kind of apply it to our lives.
Yeah.
And to ask ourselves, whether it's in the context of your small group or individually, what are some of the ways that I am tempted to distort God's image?
Yeah, it's good.
Like, what are the ways when I am honest, if I'm honest about it, that I distort who God really is to make my anxiety go away?
Right.
Or to make my fear go away.
Yeah.
Or to satisfy my inner ache of loneliness. Whatever those things are, how am I distorting God in my life?
Yeah, and how could we do that?
Yeah.
I mean, we could amplify some things that are actual true attributes of God. God's loving, God's caring, God's compassionate, whatever. We can amplify them, maybe outsize them, so that they overwhelm or diminish other aspects of his character. God is as you said in the sermon, at the end of the day, the smartest and most mature person out there, whoever they are, I think would have to say, what I know about God is very limited. I as Paul says, I see through a glass darkly, and I have to trust God. Ultimately, worship is about trust, about loyalty, because there's far much more that we don't know, that we can't know. Just like a child can't know, who's 5 years old, there's a lot of things they can't know about what's really going on around them. Why they get the answer yes and no. That's true for the most mature Christian, because you're talking about an infinite God.
Right. Yeah, that's a wonderful thing for us to think about, to try to apply to our lives.
Yeah.
Is like, in what ways are we tempted to do that?
Yeah.
Whether it's an attribute like God's love.
Yeah.
Well, nothing matters in my life then, because God loves me regardless, so I don't have to pay attention to anything I'm doing.
That's right.
Or God's judgment, let's say. For some people, that's like, they emphasize God's judgment so much, maybe that's outward focused on other people, perhaps.
Right. Or on themselves.
Or on themselves,
that's right.
both. Like, hey, those people deserve judgment. They don't deserve God's love. And you're just so focused on people out there, or inwardly turning in on yourself.
That's right.
That you say, like, well, I don't deserve anything. Or
that's right.
God could never love me.
Right.
So I think it's important to be honest about these things as we talk about them and bring them up, because the commandments, as Rob, you've said, and I love the phrase that you're using for this, they're words to live by.
Right.
God wants us to thrive in life.
Right.
Jesus said, I've come to give you life and have it to the full. And that's what we want for ourselves, and hopefully for you as well. So
Amen.
We hope that's what you all are experiencing. Thanks for joining us again here, and we look forward to seeing you next week on Between Two Sermons.